وسلم على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه. Honorable guests, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Here we are a week after Ramadan and a week pushing on our Islamic finance reflection series. And with us today is a very dear brother Youssef. And for introduction, I would just very shortly say, and I will say it with pride, I'm presenting to you the youngest CFO of the UAE's Nasdaq, and I guess that's all enough as a presentation. So we are really glad. And most of you would start asking the question. We are on an Islamic finance series, and that we have brought a CFO of a company that is not involved in the Islamic finance. So what's really the relationship? And here we are really starting wanting to convene one main message, which is that Islamic finance is not only carried out by Islamic finance practitioners, it is carried out by every and each one of us. And that's really the key message here. You don't have to be on that environment to believe or to push or to militate for that. So we are really glad to have you, Brother Youssef, with us. Ramadan Mubarak, and thank you very much for being with us today. And the topic today is the Islamic financial system within Quran. And yes, I think our guest rightly choose that because each time we're lost, and I guess with all what's happening for the current financial system, everyone would feel some kind of a loss on the pathway. And I guess the solution for that, for us as Muslim, is going back to Quran. So yes, thank you again, Brother Yusuf. And please, if you just like to throw in some introductory words on that. Thank you.
Thank, thank you so much for having me, and Ramadan Mubarak to you and to the Islamic finance community and to everyone who's listening to us. Hopefully, we're all going through a blessed month, and may God accept all your fasting and prayers. I think I would like to start from kind of where you started, which is what really is the definition of Islamic finance and what does Islamic finance represent, right? And while one very important branch of Islamic finance, yes, has to do with Islamic financing facilities, has to do with the structure of how do you do lending in a Sharia compliant manner, and how do you kind of comply within that. That's only one branch of what is otherwise a very comprehensive financial economic system in Quran, right? So the Quran and the financial kind of literature in religion is not really limited only to how do you structure a murabaha or a musharaka or a mudaraba. It's much broader than that, right? It starts from how do you create a sustainable economic system across a nation or across a region, right? So how do you, like, the world has gone through so much in terms of socialism, communism, capitalism, and different systems, but when we go back to the Quran, we find a very sustainable capitalism model, right? A model where on one hand it is a free market model where there's free demand, supply, pricing, market forces, but all within the context of a lot of parameters that guarantee social responsibility, whether it's mechanisms around redistribution of wealth, like zakat, and focusing these mechanisms on wealth-based taxation to ensure more equal distribution of wealth and money, whether it's in the form of regulations to ensure protection of minorities, protection of potential disadvantaged groups, whether it's by setting very clear social responsibilities on corporates, governments, responsibilities for shared resources. So it's basically set up that, which today, maybe if you look at some of the Nordic countries, they're the closest in terms of applying the sustainable capitalism model to it, but it's a very sustainable and critical economic model. Similarly, when you look at the financial system and the financial regulations, you see very critical foundation elements, right? So you see, for example, the rules around the segregation of principal money from any deposits or from any trusted money, a principle which kind of, when not followed, we've seen exchanges like FTX that collapse as a result of commingling of kind of depositors' money or investors' money with principal money and using it for trading. It's also systems around things like arbitration, like the Islamic literature was one of the earliest to have the party-based arbitration nomination, where you don't need to resort to courts in financial dealings and other dealings, which can potentially be expensive, can be very public, can be very cumbersome, and may lack the specialist knowledge, but rather to kind of revert to a nomination-based arbitration system where every party can nominate an arbitrator that has a closer understanding of the specific matters and can be done in a very discreet, confidential way. Protection of parties in contracts, where again Islamic literature was very early in identifying that contracts have to be well understood. They're not enough to be just signed and binding, they have to be understood. And if a party does not understand the full contract, it is mandatory to have the right legal advice to understand the contract. Otherwise, these provisions cannot be binding.
Mhm.
Also, when it comes to behavioral finance, right, Islamic literature has identified a lot of the biases that impact us and impact the market today in terms of overconfidence, in terms of loss aversion, regret aversion, etc. All of these were identified very clearly in our literature. So it defines a lot of what otherwise causes a lot of market volatility today that comes from that. Also, in terms of economic tools for government, right? So how do you leverage taxation? How do you leverage different forms of taxation? How do you have a deductible for the tax amount to protect the lower income? How you can potentially have advanced collections to kind of during times of crisis. How do you also these money that you end up saving as a government? How do you create the right sovereign wealth funds and the right savings for it to then use it as a cushion to kind of deal with financial crises? So it's a very, very, very comprehensive system of financial and economic tools, regulations, systems that really, when implemented, is meant to create a system of transparency, of sustainability that goes well beyond. And that's why, as you said, we're all involved of it by definition, because it's not about which sector you work in, it's about foundations and principles and ethics that you can apply to whatever system you operate in, whatever type of job, and ultimately it's all about bringing this level of kind of transparent prosperity to the overall system.
Yeah, yeah, that's quite insightful actually, because one of the key obstacles that Mr. Dawood Vikari told us on our second session was that Islamic finance has a problem of perception. The overall perception is that the only time you apply Islamic finance is when you want to go buy a house or buy a car. Now, in your opinion, what are the parameters that are quite advanced in our today's economy, and what are the parameters that still need to be developed on
Yes.
the thing that you just mentioned?
Yes, I think, as you said, I think part of the challenge we have is sometimes we approach Islamic finance from the end part, which is what are the rulings? That this is permissible, this is not permissible, this is allowed, this is not allowed. And the problem is sometimes this creates a divide in the approach and creates an us versus them, and it creates a yes versus a no, and compliant versus uncompliant. And that divisive approach does not allow people outside to really build the required knowledge and understanding and appreciation of where we're coming from. So if we take a step back and start more bottom up, start from the foundations of why are these things being promoted, right? The idea, for example, of risk sharing, right? That ultimately what the literature is trying to do and what the religion is trying to do is to promote more risk sharing in the economy, get more people to have skin in the game, to participate in the risk. And this way you avoid exposing one party to a disproportionate risk. You avoid herding of too much kind of money and keeping it and just kind of lending it out and not taking risk. And that ultimately risk is what backs today a lot of the success of the Western economies in venture capital, in supporting new ideas, new startups. And that risk tolerance is actually what allows a lot of prosperity. But today in the Middle East and in some of our Islamic countries, that foundational element of risk tolerance, which these literature is supposed to promote, has not actually translated into that. What it has translated into finding alternative ways around the structure to come up with alternative structures which still highly limit risk, but then under what is called Sharia compliant labels. So we want to go back to the essence. The essence is risk taking. Then we should promote structures which fundamentally allow more risk. We should tolerate mistakes. We should tolerate kind of collapses and risks, and that is what we want to do. And once the conversation goes back to these foundations, there will be kind of more areas of commonality, more areas of inclusion, and the discussion will be more intellectual, will be more collective, and will allow more people to participate in it, and then the benefits long term will be more substantive.
Yeah, and from our perspective, do you think that there are steps, I mean, on a tangible side that we can undertake to just enforce this or play an active role within that, promoting these
Definitely.
principles?
Definitely. If you think, for example, about the whole kind of ESG wave, right? Whether you want to call it ESG investing, ethical investing, etc. And whether now there is maybe a little bit of a downturn in that, but still it's kind of very substantive, right? And the reason it's very substantive is it came with a very comprehensive view on what defines ESG, right? So the environment as one side in terms of protecting the environment and climate change and emissions, but it also came in terms of social and protecting the employees, protecting the adjacent communities that live, protecting health and safety. And then it also came as governance, talking about boards, related party transactions, transparency, and hence came in as a holistic system that looked at all different sides of how do you build something sustainable. And that's how a lot of global institutions like BlackRock, etc., early on subscribed to this, promoted this, like the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, and that's how it became very important. And then there was a whole ecosystem around it of ESG ratings, ESG consulting, sustainability reporting, etc., etc. That is what we need to have an equivalent of that on the Islamic side, right? Is how do we take all of these different parts, not just the riba, not just the interest rates, but everything that's in Islam, right? The equality, the transparency, the sustainability, the kind of the trustworthiness, and then effectively have index and scores and investing strategies based on applying these principles. At that point in time, it will be much more promoting because effectively what people will realize is that, like they realize with sustainability is good business, and sustainability ultimately creates the right returns if implemented correctly. People will similarly be able to see that if you apply these Islamic principles and companies that apply them, long term, they end up generating superior returns. So what you'll find is even people who are not necessarily Muslims are not necessarily doing it because it's Islamic, but they're doing it because they believe it's the right thing and they believe it maximizes value. And that's what we really kind of need to collectively work on. So the same way, let's say today we have an IO fee that sets, okay, this is the maximum amount of your income to come from non-permissible activity. This is the maximum cash or debt as a percentage of your market cap. Let's also build a rating mechanism and an enthusiastic mechanism for companies that identify which companies are the most positive, are the most contributing to society, are the most transparent. And let's promote these companies accordingly as examples, and let's give them more investments and higher scores. And based on this, people will gravitate towards this impact-driven investing strategy.
Yeah, and that's quite interesting when you say to push towards, say, an Islamic approach toward indexing companies. Uh, Now, can you give us any examples, practical examples on ways in which companies within the Muslim world can really own this approach in their day-to-day work?
Let's take some of the, again, the teachings back from the Quran, right? Let's take, for example, it starts with labor, right, and employees. There is very kind of clear focus on Islamic literature about both timely and equitable compensation of labor force, right? So by definition, if you have kind of a pay parity ratio, if you have gender pay parity, if you have on-time payments, if you have social protection for your employees and benefit scheme, you're by definition scoring higher in that, right? Let's take the environment, for example. In the Islamic literature, there's a very clear focus on shared resources, on not depleting shared resources, on not over kind of stepping upon the resources. So if there is effectively companies which protect these resources, preserve them, etc., and not overutilize them, not overuse them, that's a clear positive, right? When it comes to, again, Islamic literature, there's a focus on transparency, on disclosures, on communication, right? On data privacy, right? On not invading upon people's privacies, people's homes. So how do you take these? Again, it's all about taking the concept. For example, let's take with privacy, right? The concept in the Quran and the Islamic literature is meant around people physical premises privacy. How do you effectively ask for permission? How do you knock? How do you not enter a place that you're not permitted to? We take this physical space from the Quran and then we apply it to everything that's virtual. We apply it to people's data. We apply it to people's information. So how do we take all of these foundational concepts? For example, the shared resource which is being described in the Quran and being protected was water, right? So how do we take this water resource and then apply it to how we think about climate? How do we think about energy? How do we think about all of these things? So how do we take these concepts, evolve them, and then effectively reward companies and kind of encourage companies which are living by these principles?
Yes, and now there is the counter arguments from some people that would say that pushing towards this approach might lead to value destruction. I mean, when I say value, I say financial, direct, explicit value destruction. How can you
Yeah.
reconciliate between these two?
I think it's the same discussion about ESG, right? Excessive narrow focus on certain elements can lead to value destruction. For example, if I today look at, for example, let's say take the energy sector, what ESG has done, and look at it very narrowly, and say, look, for example, oil is bad, then this becomes value destructive because you're ignoring the fact, you're looking at it from one angle, which is the emissions, but you're ignoring the other angle that you basically have billions of people who live in emerging markets who are looking to urbanize, looking to create economic growth, which a lot of it has to be fueled by this energy for life and energy for
Hmm.
prosperity. And hence you have to look at things holistically, where emissions is one hand, but on the other hand, you have the prosperity urbanization, and how do you balance both? So from an Islamic perspective, it would be the same. If we take one angle to something and say, okay, I'm just going to look at it from this perspective, you have to do this, then it can potentially be value destructive, not because the principle itself is, the principle never is, it's because our application to it is very narrow and is causing the value destruction. But if we take a step back and if you look at the Islamic principles, it's all about cost benefit analysis, right? And actually, one of the key Islamic principles is that preventing damage and harm and downside takes priority over creating upside and creating benefits. So as long as we take this holistic view, then there can never be a value destruction because the whole religion is built around preventing destruction before creating benefits.
Yeah, you just gave me a very insightful idea here on the structural difference between ESG and Islamic finance, which is, I mean, going back to the example of energy, we know that ESG would very simply exclude energy companies from any index and so on. It really creates a lot of problems in terms of capex and really offering people affordable energy. Now, from an Islamic perspective, pollution is still bad. This is something we all agree on. But making people or giving people a decent kind of life is also something that is really pushed. So this, I think, by this approach, there is a way Islamic finance can beat ESG because from an outsider's point of view, a lot of people would say Islamic finance, SDGs or ESG, that's the same thing. Now, there is a way we can beat them on this, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Again, if you look at all the historical stories, all the prophets, peace be upon him, stories, etc., it's all examples of what you said, of him balancing everything that is coming out of the situation. What is the upside? What is the downside? And then making a calculated decision. It was never, okay, binary, that based on this factor, I will do this or I will do that. No, it's always about what's in the collective interest, and that is always the focus, right? What does the jama'ah benefit from? What does the collectivity of people and what does humanity benefit from the collective? And that always takes priority over any individual benefit or any individual action.
Yeah, and on this now, let's bring the discussion into a micro level from an individual point of view and from an individual finance point of view. What could people on our audience and other people do on a day-to-day basis, not on a corporate level, to really embrace these principles?
I
From
think
the
first,
Quranic principles, of
yes.
course.
I think first setting an example and setting a role model, right? At the end of the day, the first thing that people will look at when they think about Islamic finance and whether it is really value add or not, before they go and read the texts, which they may or they may not read, is they will look at the actions of the Muslims in the workplace and are they living by these foundations which we are preaching or not? And then it's our, if our attitude collectively reflects this exemplary principles in the Quran, in the literature, then people will take notice that at the end of the day, it's with a prosperity. Today, when effectively the Nordic countries, when Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, they all rank high among human development indices, among responsibility indices, we're now all taking interest in trying to understand what's the Nordic model. What does social capitalism mean? What does sustainability mean? Because we said it's no way a coincidence that all of these four countries are ranking high, there must be something in their work ethic, in their approach that's correct. If today, as Muslims and as Muslim countries, we prosper, we perform well, our corporates perform well, then there's going to be a collective global interest in trying to understand what are these foundations and what are these principles we are living by. So, one, living by it, creating that role model. Two is content creation and sharing, right? Let's spread the word, right? Whatever we believe is value add to us, to our colleagues, to our countries, to our companies, let's spread it. Let's create content around it. Let's make sure that everyone else is aware of these values. and second, aware of that these values have a foundation in our literature, so that we can all be proud of our literature, and we can all encourage each other to look and find more. Right? For example, as we are promoting content about some of the foundations of finance in the Quran, we now have other series which are looking at the foundations of communication in Quran, the foundations of law in Quran. So we're promoting even people outside the finance world to also take a step back and look at kind of what's there. And then three, trying to bring new ideas, like even if we don't control what the corporate does, what we can control at a micro level is to bring ideas. And at the end of the day, the most successful corporates are the ones who work based on idea sourcing, based on crowdsourcing ideas from all their employees, from all the stakeholders. And these cultures are the ones that end up succeeding the most and having the most innovation.
Yeah, and on here, I mean, there are really two questions, and on one, maybe on your opinion, what is the most urgent matter on which, or or the urgent matter on which we can activate and act, and on which can bring the maximum benefit to our society, amongst all these variables that you've just mentioned?
I think equality. Equality remains a fundamental underpinning of religion on both a social and a financial system. And that was one of the main premises that all religions have come with, right? Religions have not just come with a view of a worship of a single God purely from a worship perspective and from a religious perspective. They've come with an idea that a lot of these multiple gods, a lot of these religious systems that were being used to exploit people economically and socially by creating intermediaries between God and the people, by creating multiple religious systems from which they can control people, can control economics, can decide what to do. And when all religions came with a view of it's a single God, they came with a view of breaking all of these economics and social segregations and systems, of making sure that everyone is one and everyone is the same. And hence, the first thing we need to do when it comes to whether it's finance, whether it's social, whether it's our daily life, is embrace this by having equality between everything and avoiding all sorts of layers and hierarchies and that's, I think that's one. Two is transparency, right? I think one of, again, the key fundamental premises of all religions came that of communication, of transparency, of honesty, and of fair dealings and non-exploitation. So it becomes very important that as we think about win-win situations, we don't think of things as zero-sum games. We never think of things as I exploit one another, we make money from one another, we trick one another, but rather it's all how do we go for the collective? How do we go for the collective win? So every time we're doing a business deal, let's think about what's the win-win that maximizes value for everyone, that creates recurring relationships, that makes people go away and say, look, I'm the transacting with that person was a delight because he was professional, he was ethical, he represented these qualities. It's not that, by the way, I got the maximum out of the deal, I just managed to get something here and and kind of put under the carpet something there.
Yeah, and on here I will throw in one small example when you talked about equality and how Islam came in with this notion of no intermediaries. You know, the key difference between Islamic and Christian architecture is that Islamic, for instance, Islamic mosque are all about circularity, windows and arcs and so on. When you go on the other side for church, it's all about a triangle form. And the triangle brings in the notion of intermediation between people and their God. But on an arc or on a circle level, there is zero angle, which means there is a direct link between the people and Allah. And that was a way by which early Islamic architects have translated the principle of uluhiyah into their today lives. And there is also maybe one key urgent matter to think, which is the concept of money. Money today undergoes a structural change. People are talking about maybe the depletion of fiat money, going back to gold. How can we, I mean, uh, what does Quran say on this matter? Because I guess money and money management really lies in the heart of the financial system. So what are your thoughts about this?
I think again one of the key things that obviously a kind of religion and Islam has tried to always for is to protect the purchasing power of people, right? And that again is the principle. So ultimately, we can all debate the technicalities of the gold system, the crypto, the fiat system, etc. But what we can all agree on is what's the objective? The objective is for people not to face erosion of purchasing power, right? When effectively there's excessive money printing and effectively excessive quantitative interventions, people ultimately suffer as a result, right? And at the end of the day, again, what's at the center of religion? It's the human and trying to protect the human and elevate the human and satisfy their needs and their dignity, right? And hence today, the objective should be how can we make sure that the purchasing power is maintained? Now, whether it's in the form of gold, in the form of crypto, in the form of less excessive money printing by governments, but that should always be the objective, is controlling inflation, right? And if you think about, again, at the end of the day today, what's the duality of any central bank in the world? It's protecting against inflation and against unemployment. And these are the two same principles at the heart of religion, right? Using gold as a way to try to combat and prevent inflation, and then doing everything to promote and effectively increase the value of employment, both religiously and physically, and kind of almost celebrating in every form. And that's why the Prophet, peace be upon him, used to celebrate agriculture, celebrate industrial, celebrate trade. And you will see for him a hadith about every single almost domain of work, because he was constantly trying to encourage a culture of employment. And that's why, again, a lot of the financial system in terms of zakat, etc., is trying to be based upon trying to prevent the accumulation of wealth and trying to re-inject this wealth back into the system and encourage spending, because spending creates that level of employment, right? So it's these financial and underpinnings.
So let me be pessimistic for a second here. Do you think we are beyond repair? Because in some cases, especially on a business level, a lot of companies are really operating on a zero-sum games. I lose, you win, or vice versa. So do you think, is it the case beyond repair?
I don't think so, to be honest. And I think, and again, I think here we can take again a page from religious books, right? All of the prophets have basically been sent, or not all, but a lot of them have been sent at times of absolute darkness, right? At times when things were like really, really bad. And that was their message, right? To turn things around, not only religiously, but to turn things around economically and socially and in every aspect, right? So there's always a kind of a better future ahead. And at the end of the day, we also have to take a step back, right? Yes, maybe there are things that from a capitalistic perspective that has created some greed, some exploitation, but we also have to acknowledge that we live in the most prosperous time in history from a prosperity perspective, right? And that's also a fact that we cannot ignore. But unfortunately, this prosperity has not created equality, right? Today we have more than 700 million people who still suffer from acute hunger, right? 111 people still go to bed hungry every day. So our problem today is not necessarily a problem of economic prosperity. There are problems there, but we have definitely come a very long way of creating that prosperity. And we have collectively, as a world, created an economic system that has managed to create a lot of resources. But the problem today is this has not gone around effectively enough among everyone, and there are hundreds of millions of people who are excluded from the system. And that's precisely why when we go back to the Quran and we go back to the religious texts, let's also try to focus the most on these foundations that bring equality, as you said, bring circularity, which is an amazing concept and word that I really think should be part of everything we do, right? That's circular. And today, again, you talk about the circular economy as one of the kind of most, let's say, new concepts, but you described it as something that's very much in our kind of DNA and backbone, right? So this circularity, this redistribution is something that can definitely be brought in, can immediately. And again, when you look at a lot of the economic experiments in Latin America, in Eastern Europe, etc., in Asia, they prove that this is doable. And our regions, thankfully, and our Islamic countries are full of resources, full of brilliant people, full of brilliant talent. So I definitely think a lot of it can be definitely improved.
Yeah, now let's move to the first question from the audience here. He said, Brother Adnan asks you, on the indexing side, what do you think will be the role of Islamic finance institution in incentivizing positive conduct from corporates? Is the following SDG slash ESG compliance requirement enough?
Yes, again, if maybe let's look at, for example, carbon, right, as one of the clear ideas today of how our governments incentivizing, let's say, kind of emissions regulation. They are launching carbon credits. So if you are a positive contributor, you get credits which you can sell and make money. They're introducing carbon taxes. So if you are an emitter, then you get pay a tax. They're introducing mandatory carbon disclosure. So similar to how you disclose your financial statements. If you have a loss, you have to tell the market you have a loss. You have to tell the market you have these carbon emissions. They're introducing effectively differential on financing pricing. So if you're borrowing, your borrowing rate has a positive or downward adjustments or upward depending on the level of emissions you have. You have these indices. So if you're part of the index because you're compliant, you're getting all of these passive flows of investors, which you don't benefit from. And as passive investing continues to increase compared to active, that difference continues to happen. So we need to effectively build on these same foundations, right? Say today, okay, our Islamic banks will give you a lower number of basis points cost if you are compliant. We'll create an Islamic index that that you end up investing in. So we kind of create these tax breaks, we create these credits that you can sell to kind of follow that same approach.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really getting enough from new ideas, research ideas here on the indexing, brother, which is quite interesting. And the second question from brother Adnan also, he says, what do you say with the respect of emerging movements from concept of halal to tayyib? And he's referencing something we discussed, because we are halal, but we
Yes.
must be tayyib. So what do you
Yes.
think of that?
Exactly. It's the same way as how we think about and outside the economic and finance world, how we think about going from iman to ihsan, right? That we should always be elevating ourselves. At the end of the day, it's never binary, right? And it's never okay, just is this halal or haram. It's always about how can we be the best version of ourselves. How can we contribute the most, and how can we drive people alongside us on the journey? And equally, if we're also trapped in something that's impermissible or haram, let's also not just get stuck there that that's the end of it. No, even within the haram, even within the impermissible, there are different grades depending on the damage we're causing. So I think let's in general go out of the view of yes, of course it's very important to say halal and haram, but let's not get stuck there that if it's halal, that's the best we can do. No, we can always go to tayyib and to better. And if it's also haram and we're not able to go out in the short term, that doesn't mean there's nothing we can do. We can be less and less and less until inshallah we can flip. So that it's always a constant journey and a constant journey of improvement that we should always be going through.
Yeah, I mean, on this point, let me remind the audience with something we've talked about is that now, for instance, in Malaysia, people are really now encouraged to think, to start preparing for the day when Islamic finance goes beyond 50%. So everyone needs to start thinking and preparing for the day because being equal and embracing equality and transparency is no easy task for companies, because over the short term you might see that the value is decreasing or that the market are penalizing you, but over the long term this is where the value resides. So there is also this step of preparing yourself to the world, because let's be honest, no one is prepared for a 100% Islamic economics, because it's no easy task to give to others, right?
100%, it's an investment, as you said. In any investment in the world, you have to spend first to make a return, right? It's exactly the same. And again, if we go back to Islamic principles, that was the Prophet taught us with sadaqah, right? That there are always things which on day one physically goes down, but only for it to go up significantly more afterwards.
Yes, and I guess there are, I don't think whether we still have other questions, but yeah, yeah, general thought, general advice. What do you say to the audience, Brother Youssef?
I think we're in Ramadan, right? So first again, Ramadan Mubarak.
Or
We do,
maybe, yeah, the
yeah. Let's
last one
take your
from
question.
Manan.
Yeah. To achieve ideal. I think everyone needs to start by themselves, right? I think at the end of the day, waiting for an orchestrated solution from the top, as these things happen, they're great. But today we need to focus more about what we can control. Today, as you said, what can I do today to make things better, right? So if I want to have a better economic condition, then I need to work harder. I need to circulate more money in the economy. I need to get more education and spread the knowledge. And if every one of us does this, then things will improve. Because at the end of the day, what is the system, right? It's the combination of all of us. We create the system, right? Every one of us is part of the system. So I think these individual efforts to contribute, to fix, to move forward become extremely important, right? And taking this initiative, right? Again, We learn from Prophet Yusuf, right? When he effectively came, okay, I want to take responsibility for the finance sector, for the treasury. I want to step up. I want to do that. I want to fix, right? So I think these individual efforts should always be the starting points towards change and towards improvement.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe last words, last
Yes, yes, I
advice.
think yes,
It's
yes, I
it's
think
always the same thing with yeah. All right. Yeah, that's
yes.
yours.
Yes, yes. I think exactly. I think we're in Ramadan again. Ramadan Mubarak. It's obviously, yani the best time of the year. It's a time of blessings, a time. And again, we need to all remember what are the core values of Ramadan and why is the month so important, right? Its core values are solidarity, right? We all come together in everything that we do. We're all here for each other, and any system can only be improved and can, whether it's Islamic finance, anything else, when we all come together, support each other, share knowledge, share content, advise each other, listen to each other's ideas, and kind of and work together. It's also the spirit of giving, right? That it's a month where we're giving. We're giving, and giving is not just money, right? It's also giving knowledge. It's giving time to each other. It's giving emotional support. It's giving empathy. So again, all of these things to each other, and it's a month of sustainability, right? That it's not what we do for an hour, it's not what we do for a day, it's not about what we make today. It's about the sustainable impact that we're going to see over months and years and generations to come, right? So I think everything we do, let's think about how can this be positive to others, how can this positive impact last for a very long time, and how can this effectively giving allow us to kind of come all together, and how can it create a cycle of even more circular giving over time, as you said.
Yes, I think we are very, very fortunate to have each raining month. I mean, I don't think other nations would have the opportunity, but we are training 1 month for the 11 remaining months. And I think this is really because if you can do it for 30 days, you can do it for the rest of the year. So I guess it's all right. So it's been quite exciting to really.
We
Yes,
have something
Mustafa
on.
just jumped in. Yeah. All
Yes,
right.
yes. Thank you so much, Brother Youssef. Really insightful conversation ongoing. There are a couple of comments going on LinkedIn, and we've been trying to connect
Please,
them, but we're not able to. But just give a moment. I think we'll have
of
them
course,
shared shortly. We've got a
of course, of
question
course.
by Muhammad Osama, who's. I'm just going to read it out, and then you react to it, Brother Youssef. It says, "Thank you, Youssef, for the insightful input. How adaptable is Islamic finance in today's modern economy, in the green energy transition and low carbon solution era?"
Yes,
He went further. He also asked, "What are the key challenges and opportunities in expanding Islamic finance across the region and the global financial landscape?"
definitely. I think when it comes to green specifically and to kind of the environment, I think the Prophet, peace be upon him, I think he has one hadith which I think is the ultimate sustainability that no one can ever express it better than him, right? He says, if it's the end of the world, if it's effectively Judgment Day, and you have one seed left in your hand, you implant it, right? And this teaches us everything in one sentence, right? It teaches us that it doesn't matter what's the impact or magnitude of what you're doing, right? Imagine you're at the end of the world's about to completely collapse. The seed you plant, by any objective measure, has zero impact and will be eradicated the minute after you plant it. But you still plant it. You don't think what's going to happen, what difference does it make. You think that it's the right thing to do, and I'm going to do it, right? Second thing is the last thing he's thinking, the last example he's giving, right before the destruction of the entire world, is the environment. Is the environment, because he believes that this is the environment we live in, that this is the food that's going to come out and feed people, that this is the foundation of the world we live in, right? So for him, that's very, very important. Third is the idea of taking an action, right? Imagine you're in this situation, like everything is collapsing around you, but you're still planting something, you're still doing something. So I think this is the ultimate sustainability, right? Is that do the right thing, care for the environment, doesn't matter what's happening around you. It's all very small efforts. So as we think about the net zero in 2045 or 2050, and as we think about that 1.5 degrees of climate change, as we think about this climate change globally, and someone can say, what's my plastic bag gonna do, and what's my one tree plantation gonna do? No, it's gonna do a lot once we kind of all do it together. So I think every time there's a new trend, there's something that's coming out of nowhere, and we think this is totally new. There is no way that this could have been in a book from 1,400 years ago. Again and again, we're proven wrong. That actually there is a very clear verse text that's almost as if being said as we are standing today in effectively the exact situation that's happening today.
Yeah, that's, I mean, if you don't think about it at first, it would seem like a normal hadith, but now it really the burden is quite high. And there is also always this example that I'd like to give. You know, these small bottles, they cost nothing, but everyone now has this small plastic bottle. I mean, I would say because if I mean the first decision that you would have to take, I mean, because sometimes they said as long as they are allowed by the authorities, you can buy them. But why would you want to wait for the authorities to ban these plastic bottles so you can move up to something circular? And it would say, well, all right, what would change for me if I don't, if I stopped buying these? And that's really the idea here. We should Islam does not give you the right to think about the impact. The impact is not yours to adhere. You just need to adhere to the principle so you can go there.
100%. 100%. And this takes us, I think, back to the point of our brother around the halal versus tayyib. If we take a
Mhm,
step back, the vast majority of things are permissible in Islam. One of the key foundations of Islam is that it actually, the haram is very limited. The vast majority is permissible. But not everything that is permissible is the same. And the Islam encourages us to really think through, even with things which are permissible, do we really need them? At the end of the day, consumption is permissible of everything. But overconsumption should not be
mhm.
something we should do just because consumption is permissible. So when it comes to food waste, when it comes to water waste, when it comes to plastic, all of these things, even though yes they are technically permissible, we should be thinking about the impact of them even if they're permissible.
Yeah, that adds another layer of stringency on us, and that's really what makes us different from the others. And because you have this layer that others don't have. Yeah. So I don't know, brother Mustafa, if there are other, or we can link it in. What are the key challenges and opportunities? Yeah, I think we've answered that. We've covered that, right? No.
Yeah, I think just the one point again I would say here about expanding Islamic finance globally is again the entry point is important, right? If we always go with with a single entry point, which is by the way, I want to
Hmm.
eliminate bonds and replace them by sukuk. I want to eliminate loans and replace them by murabahas. Even we will have a lot of success in the Islamic countries because people want what's halal, but we will not have as much success as we would like to have in other countries where people do not have the religious incentive to abide by that. So let's make sure that we create economic incentives, we create sustainability incentives for people to do it. So, for example, today, when Goldman Sachs or the government of Hong Kong or the government of Luxembourg issue sukuk, they don't issue it because they believe in the Sharia compliance. They issue it because they found a deep enough pool of liquidity that they want to access and benefit from. So that's what we need to continue to work on. What are the economic and sustainability angles that we can bring to the global system, utilizing, etc., so we attract people into kind of the system and attract people into these instruments.
Yeah, that's really a quite big message you're convening there, brother Yusuf, because it's really setting the cap from what people used to do for the last 50 years to really sit in the cap to a new thing. And I mean, at a first sight, you'd say it's quite difficult, but no, I think the second way is quite easy because it really dispersed the burden on every and each one of us instead of putting the burden of spreading Islamic finance on institution. So that's quite
100%.
smart actually on
100%.
to do so. Yeah.
100%. And I think the comment we just got is exactly the same. Is saying basically we need to show that the value is not just for Muslims, the value is for everyone. But this starts from going with the value because if you start your conversation from halal and haram, permissible and impermissible, then by definition we cannot show it to the non-Muslims because by definition they are not bound by design by what's halal and haram. So our discussion becomes obsolete in the first line of discussion. Whereas if we approach it from a value perspective, that this is the value we're bringing, park for a second what's permissible and impermissible. It is value creating. It's better for you. It's better for the environment. It's better long term. Then we have created a common area of discussion with everyone that's independent of religious aspects where they can see the value. Then after they see the value, they say, okay, very interesting. But this is very valuable. Let me read more about this religion. Let me read more. And this way, then they come themselves. They want to know what's permissible because now they've built a conviction that's what permissible is value add. They have this association. So now they're the ones incentivized to ask, is this permissible? Because now they believe in the back of their minds that permissible and value add, they come together. But first we have to demonstrate and bring them in and lead them in, and then kind of that becomes the norm.
We should have named this session a call for a new framework. Yeah, it was quite interesting, and yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, we've spilled it into more than 30 minutes, but it was joyful and it was quite interesting. Uh, what new ideas can we explore? And maybe that would be your last comment if you want new ideas, new advice, as always.
Yes, I think the new ideas will come from let's go back and read. I think let's use this maybe Ramadan as an opportunity. You know, a lot of the Islamic scientists they say that reading less but with a lot of tadabbur, a lot of understanding, coming up with ideas, may be better than reading more. Not everyone agrees with this view. To
Hmm.
be clear, some
Hmm.
people say no, it depends on how much you read. But at least there's a school of thought that says that even if you read less but you read with tadabbur, that may be even better. So maybe let's use this Ramadan as a way that as we're reading the Quran this time and as we're doing inshallah khatmas, let's read it and try to think through ideas. Let's every time we read a verse, think, okay, we're reading it, but what's the application today? And let's come up with an idea. And again, this is not promoting new tafsir. This is not saying new interpretation. This is not saying we're not religious experts. We cannot interpret. We cannot. What we're saying is let's explore. Let's come up with ideas, and you will see these new ideas floating. To give you an example from outside finance, there is now a new series on LinkedIn which is foundations of communication in Quran. She's, for example, talking about how Quran has today. Warren Buffett says it takes 20 years to build a reputation. It takes 5 minutes to ruin it. Some of these foundations, you'll find them in the religious texts, how preserving reputation is very important, right? Spreading rumors, how the Quran has spent a lot of time talking about not believing rumors and not believing market speculation. So a lot of these ideas will come when we go back and read, but this time we're reading and keeping in our mind we're in 2025. That's what's happening at work, that's what's happening in social life. Let me read the verse as if I'm reading it today and see what I learn from it. Again, this is not an invite to reinterpret, it's not an invite to do non-scholarly thing, it's an invite to leave the interpretation as it is, but come up with new ideas in parallel to the interpretation.
Yeah, for sure, because an engineer or a businessman or a doctor reading the Quran will add up a new way of not interpretation, of understanding. I mean, the interpretation is not for us to do, but the understanding is to everyone. It's the right of everyone because Quran is distant to each one of us. And if you have a background, you will start understanding from your own background, which is totally insightful. Thank you so much,
Thank you so
brother
much.
Yusuf. I mean, we're glad to have you again. And I mean,
Looking forward.
it says that I wish it for you to be not your first time, but to have you on multiple series again, multiple talks, because for sure it was quite joyful. And maybe we will set the rendezvous and the meeting for next year, or maybe sooner than that. Thank you so much.
Definitely, definitely. Maybe just the last thing I want to say, I want to pick up on
Yes.
this one on the screen. A lot of times we always like to believe, as Egyptians, we are very proud of our African heritage, right? We are African, so I'm not sure if the comment from the screen, someone maybe who are not aware that we're Egyptians, but this is a point you always stress on because sometimes, unfortunately, Egyptians are perceived to prioritize their Middle Eastern or their Arab heritage above their African. So we're definitely from inside Africa and we're core to Africa, and we like to think of ourselves as African as anyone from sub-Saharan Africa is. But I think Africa has always been foundational to religion, right? If you go back to religious history, obviously proud being an Egyptian, which was the roadway and was the gateway for Islam to enter Africa and to stay there for a very long time and to be adopted in a great way. So I definitely think it's a big opportunity, and also there is an opportunity that for every location that is developing, Islamic finance is an opportunity. Like, for example, if you look today in Africa, because it's one of the big frontiers of growth, by definition, there is less financial inclusion. So let's say
Mhm.
if I go today to a country in Africa that does not have a neobank, does not have a digital bank, right? Like the banks in Europe and Latin America and the Middle East. And then I build a Sharia compliant digital neobank. This way, I'm not only addressing the Islamic finance need, I'm also addressing the foundational need for financial inclusion. But because I do it in a Sharia compliant way, this becomes the normal for people. So then it attracts more people. So let's not only think about how can I go to places and promote Islamic finance. Let me promote finance itself, financial inclusion in Africa. Let me build payments, build financial infrastructure, build wealth management, build the digital banks, build all the things that people need for Africa, foundationally for their economics, for their prosperity, but then build it in a Sharia compliant way attract people into the financial prosperity, and then couple it with the Sharia. And this way, people will be keen on it even more, will appreciate it even more, and you'll attract even more people.
Yeah, I mean, Africa is fertile not just on its land, but also on the infrastructure and the needs it needs. So yes, I totally agree. Yeah, without further ado, I mean, it's time, I guess, to close the session. And again, Jazakallah khairan. Thank you
So
very
much.
much. Ramadan Mubarak, and see you soon, inshallah, brother. Assalamu alaikum
See
wa
you.
rahmatullah.
Go, Salam.